1. This is an excerpt from Fraud and Forgeries of the Fathers in 1882 by Joseph Mazzine Wheeler. According to Wikipedia, Wheeler was born in London. He briefly worked as a lithographer in Edinburgh. 1. He became an atheist after reading the works of Charles Darwin, John Stuart Mill and Herbert Spencer. 2. In 1868, he met George William Foote and they became lifelong friends. 1. Wheeler worked as an editor for Foote's Freethinker journal. This work Fraud and Forgeries does appear to reliable information about Christianity's problems. Wheeler is aware that Paul presented a problem to Christianity, and he carries water for the idea Paul was the true founder of Christianity intended to insult Jesus. But it actually reflects on the weak Christians who did not stand up for Christ, and went with an apostate. So I am creating these YouTubes so if you want to study this work for its true despite its anti-Christianity and anti-Paulianity we can learn some key information that can save hours of research. He points us directly at the sources of evidence on his points he raises.
Justin, who is said to have derived his surname from having suffered martyrdom about AD 166 to 167, is the first of the Fathers who shows any detailed acquaintance with the statements found in the Gospels. A large number of spurious works have been attributed to him, but we take as genuine the Apologies and the Dialogue with Trypho, a Jew. In the first of these, chap. 46, he indicates that he wrote about 150 years after the birth of Jesus. He was born at Neapolis in Palestine, being by descent a Greek, and in the early part of his life a heathen. He tells us he was converted to Christianity by an old man, whom his biographer, Father Haloix, thinks may have been an incarnate angel. Tillemont, the learned Catholic historian, considers this highly probable. Fabricius thought it was Bishop Polycarp, but Credner considers the narrative a fiction. It is difficult to believe that his apologies were ever presented to the Roman emperors or that his dialogue with the Jew represents an actual controversy with an opponent. Dr. Justin speaks of Justin as of a warm and credulous temper, remarks on ecclesiastical history, chap. 15, page 243, volume 1, 1846, and Mosheim declares the learned well know that Justin Martyr is not to be considered in every respect as an oracle, but that much of what he relates is wholly undeserving of credit. Commentaries, Vali, at page 112, 1813. The Reverend John Jones includes him among those who did not scruple to use forged writings.
In chapters 20 and 44 of his first apology, for instance, he appeals to the Sibylline Book of Prophecies respecting Christ and his kingdom, which it has been proved to a demonstration by David Blondel and others, were forged by some early Christians with a view to persuading the ignorant and unsuspecting heathen that their oracles had foretold Christ. Celsus, the heathen, detected and pointed out this falsification. He quotes spurious productions of Hystaspes, of Orpheus and Sophocles, in which Christians had foisted their own ideas. For not content with counterfeiting the writings of celebrities among themselves, they were equally unscrupulous in regard to the writings of the pagans. Origen, Book 7, 53, page 475, the Sibyl was appealed to by Theophilus and other early Christian apologists. The author of Questions et Responsions ad Orthodoxos, a work falsely ascribed to Justin, says that Clement of Rome, in his epistle to the Corinthians, appeals to the writings of the Sibyl. In the present version there is no such allusion. Justin confidently affirms that Plato and Aristophanes mention the ancient Sibyl as a prophetess, and he gravely relates concerning her being the daughter of Berosus, who wrote the Chaldean history.
Justin confidently affirms that Plato and Aristophanes mention the ancient Sibyl as a prophetess, and he gravely relates concerning her being the daughter of Berosus, who wrote the Chaldean history. He says, 1 Paul, chapter 21, page 25, and when we say also that the Word, who is the first birth of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died, and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those whom you esteem sons of Jupiter. He argues, chap. 23, page 27, that devils inspired the heathen poets and priests to relate beforehand the Christian narratives as having already happened, and makes out, live, that the devils, knowing the prophetic words of Moses, invented the stories of Bacchus and Bellerophon. And when they heard it said by the other prophet Isaiah that he should be born of a virgin, and by his own means ascend into heaven, they pretended that Perseus was spoken of. And so with Hercules and Aesculapius. All of which puts us in mind of the learned divine, who argued that God put the fossils into the earth less than 6,000 years ago, in order to deceive the geologists and exhibit the vanity of human knowledge.
Justin also informs us, Paul 66, that through the suggestions of wicked demons, bread and wine were placed before the persons to be initiated into the mysteries of Mithras in imitation of the Eucharist. He could believe that Jesus, sitting at a table, actually offered his own body and blood to eat and drink, but the idea that the Christian sacrament of the Lord's Supper was copied from the mysteries never struck him. Having plenty of devils, he put them to a deal of use. He tells us how they came into existence. God committed the care of men and of all things under heaven to angels whom he appointed over them. But the angels transgressed this appointment, and were captivated by love of women, and begot children who are those that are called demons, 2 Paul v. page 75. These subdued the human race partly by magical writings and partly by fears and punishments. Not content with inventing the heathen mythology, they raised up the Samaritans, Simon and Menander, who did many mighty works by magic. This is what he says the Jews said of Jesus, Dial, chap. 6. Justin twice has the audacity to assert that the Romans erected a statue to the Samaritan Simon, as a god. He gives the inscription Simoni Deo Sancto, to Simon the Holy God. This, if not a fraud, was a very gross error. Apart from the unlikelihood of the story and its absence of corroboration by any heathen writer, a fragment has been found with the inscription, Simoni Sancto Deo, being probably the base of a statue erected to the Sabine deity, Semos Sancus. He further charges the Romans with human sacrifices in celebrating the mysteries of Saturn, a charge absolutely false and unsupported by any pagan author, although repeated by the Christian fathers, Tatian, Cyprian, Tertullian, Lactantius, Epiphanius, etc. Justin also says the devils put forward and aided Mark Ion, the follower of Paul, who accused the other apostles of having perverted the gospel doctrines. He frequently alleges that the Christians cast out devils in the name of Jesus Christ, and that women and men among them possessed prophetic gifts, but he gives no special instance of any miracle wrought in his own time. He makes maniacs and demoniacs to be possessed by the spirits of the dead, and appeals to necromancy, divination by immaculate children, dream senders and assistant spirits, in proof of life after death, immortality. He seems to have considered the gift of God. All the early fathers believed in necromancy. Lactantius, Divine Institutes, Book 4, Chap. 27, calls it the most certain proof of Christianity, because those who are skilled in calling forth the spirits of the dead bring Jupiter and other gods from the lower regions, but not Christ, for he was not more than 2 days there. Justin says we ought to pray that the evil angel may not seize our soul when it departs from the body.
He makes the victory over Amalek a type of Christ's victory over demons, and declares that Isaiah said evil angels inhabit the land of Tanis in Egypt. He declares of the Jews in the wilderness, the latchets of your shoes did not break, and your shoes waxed not old, and your garments wore not away, but even those of the children grew along with them. Dialogue with Trypho, 131, page 266. This is a very consistent addition to the fable found in Dut 29, 5. He charges, Dial, chap. 72, the Jews with having removed passages from Ezra and Jeremiah, and in the following chapter with having taken away the words, from the wood, in the passage from the 96th Psalm, Tell ye among the nations the Lord hath reigned from the wood, to which the note appended in the Ante-Nicene Christian Library, edition, page 189, is, these words were not taken away by the Jews, but added by some Christian. Otto Tertullian follows Justin in regard to this passage. He complains of their rejecting the Septuagint version, and gravely tells how Ptolemy, king of Egypt, had 70 different translators shut up in 70 separate cots or cells for the purpose of translating the Hebrew scriptures. After the completion, Ptolemy found the 70 men had not only given the same meaning but had employed the same words, whereupon he believed the translation had been written by divine power. By way of proof that he narrates no fable, he says, "We ourselves, having been in Alexandria, saw the remains of the little cots still preserved," addressed to Greeks, chapter 13, page 300. Ptolemy, however, he makes contemporary with Herod, Apol. 31:33. Christ, he says, suffered under Herod the Ascalonite. He calls Moses the first prophet, yet declares he was predicted before he appeared, first, 5,000 years before, and again 3,000, then 2,000, then 1,000, and yet again 800, in the succession of generations, prophets after prophets arose. 1 Apol, chap. 31, page 38. David, he makes to have lived 1500 BC. He put into the mouth of his antagonist Trypho, the following words which possibly represent the usual position taken up by the Jews: "But Christ, if he has indeed been born and exists anywhere, is unknown, and does not even know himself, and has no power until Elias come to anoint him, and make him manifest to all. And you, having accepted a groundless report, invent a Christ for yourselves, and for his sake are inconsiderately perishing." Chap. 8, page 97. In answer to this home thrust, Justin promises, "I shall prove to you as you stand here that we have not believed empty fables." Justin was acquainted with the works of Josephus, and if the passage had been then in existence concerning Jesus being the Christ, who was punished on the cross, and who appeared again the third day, the divine prophets having spoken these and many other wonders about him, here was the opportunity to bring it forward. Instead of doing so, or stating who testified to the existence of Christ and his wonderful works, he rambles off to his favorite argument from prophecy and piles up a heap of interminable nonsense, which if put forward as a serious defense of Christianity at the present time, would either excite suspicion of covert infidelity or be greeted with derision. In his apology he twice calls in evidence the Acts of Pilate, but as with the books of the Sibyl, it is again a Christian forgery and not a heathen document he refers to. This is clear from one of the passages he refers to being found in the extant Acts of Pilate or Gospel of Nicodemus. If any official report had been sent by Pilate, it is not likely to have related the miracles of the person put to death. Nor is it probable that Justin would have known the contents of such a document. Justin, in the beginning of the second half of the 2nd century, being the very first father who tells us of Jesus being God, born of the Virgin Mary, crucified under Pontius Pilate, dead and rising again and ascending into heaven, for the spurious epistles attributed to Ignatius must be dated after Justin's time, it is important to know where he got his startling information from. He never once mentions Gospels by either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. He refers indeed at least 13 times to memoirs or memoirs of the apostles, but without the least indication of their nature, number, or extent. In one place, Dial 106, he seems to identify them with the Gospel of Peter, referred to by Serapion, Tertullian and Origen. Canon Westcott, who argues that it refers to the Gospel of Mark, commonly placed under the authority of Peter, thus translates the passage, the mention of the fact that Christ changed the name of Peter, one of the apostles, and that the event has been written in his, Peter's, memoirs. The best authorities agree that upon strictly critical grounds the passage refers to Peter. The Ante-Nicene Christian Library, page 233, however reads, "And when it is said that he changed the name of one of the apostles to Peter, and when it is written in the memoirs of him that this so happened," making the work referred to be the memoirs of Jesus. The only direct mention Justin makes of any writer in the New Testament is the following, "And further, there was a certain man with us, whose name was John, one of the apostles of Christ, who prophesied, by a revelation that was made to him that those who believed in our Christ would dwell 1,000 years in Jerusalem, and that thereafter the general, and, in short, the eternal resurrection and judgment of all men would likewise take place. Dial, chap. 81, page 201. The author of Supernatural Religion says, the manner in which John is here mentioned after the memoirs had been so constantly referred to, clearly shows that Justin did not possess any gospel also attributed to John, Volume 1, page 298, 1879. This conclusion is corroborated by many circumstances also adduced by Dr. Davidson. For instance, his doctrine of the Logos is different from that in the Gospel ascribed to John. He does not mention any of the miracles found in that Gospel, and instead of knowing the long discourses given therein, declares, brief and concise utterances fell from him, for he was no sophist. A. Paul. I. Chap. 14, page 18. That he does name John, however, as the author of the Apocalypse, and refers by name to the Old Testament writers no less than 197 times, while in about as many passages from the memoirs, he never identifies their writer, unless in that concerning Peter, is surely incompatible with the idea that they were the canonical Gospels. The whole question of the identity of these memoirs with our Gospels is ably and lengthily dealt with in English on the Orthodox side, by Lardner, Bishop K., Professor Norton, and Canons Westcott and Sandy. These arguments the inquiring reader should compare with those of Bishop Marsh, Dr. Giles, Dr. Davidson, and the author of Supernatural Religion. It is evident that the account of the sayings and doings of Jesus in the memoirs are, in the main, very similar to the synoptics, especially Matthew, and it is likely they were the principal materials from which our canon was formed. But it is not certain if Justin had one document, 2, 3, 4, or a dozen. In his first apology, chap. 66, there is certainly found this expression, for the apostles in the memoirs composed by them, which are called Gospels, have thus delivered unto us, etc., page 69. But Dr. Donaldson says of the words in italics, Schleiermacher, Marsh, and others, regarded these words as an interpolation, and they certainly look like one. Critical History of Christian Literature, Volume 2, page 329, 1866. Except in one or two instances, parallels with our Gospels are only made by patching together passages from different Gospels. By this process the connection is broken, while the quotations in Justin have for the most part a consecutive order, and, as is shown by the context, had such an order in the memoirs, from which they were taken. While quoting them nearly 200 times he makes hardly a single allusion to those circumstances of time and place which are found in our Gospels. He also gives particulars not to be found in the canonical books. Thus he says, Dial, chap. 78, that Jesus was born in a cave, and cites Isaiah 33, 16, as prophesying this. This contradicts Luke but is found in the Gospel of James, the Gospel of the Infancy, and the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Matthew and Luke give discrepant accounts of the genealogy of Jesus. Justin differs from both. He traces the Davidian descent of the Christ through Mary, which again agrees with James. He 9 times mentions the Magi coming from Arabia, not from the East. His quotation of the angel's message to Mary, A. Paul. I. 33, agrees better with the Gospel of James than with Luke or Matthew. Speaking of the journey of Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem, Justin says, on the occasion of the first census which was taken in Judea, under Cyrenius, he, Joseph, went up from Nazareth, where he lived, to Bethlehem, to which he belonged, to be enrolled. The differences between the account of Justin and that in Luke are manifest. He states that Jesus made plows and yokes as a carpenter, which is found in the Gospel of the Infancy. Thrice he speaks of John as sitting by Jordan, Dial 49, 51, and 88, and he even narrates that when Jesus stepped into the water a fire was kindled in the Jordan. This also was from the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Epiphanius gives it from a version found among the Ebionites. It was also mentioned in another early Christian publication, the Preaching of Paul. Justin has the Holy Ghost say to Jesus at his baptism, "This is my beloved Son, today have I begotten thee." The same form of expression was used in the, he says, Dial, see, that when the Jews went out to the Mount of Olives to take Jesus there was not a single man to help him. This is in contradiction to all our Gospels. He says that when Herod succeeded Archelaus, Pilate, by way of compliment, sent to him Jesus bound, chap. c. He tells how they sat Jesus on the judgment seat, and said, "Judge us, Paul, chap. 35. He also relates that Jesus said, "In whatsoever things I apprehend you, in those also will I judge you." Grotius and others think this taken from the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Upon 2 occasions Justin says that the Jews sent persons about the world to spread calumnies. So manifestly has Justin gone to other sources than our 4 Gospels that Canon Sandy admits. Either Justin has used a lost Gospel or Gospels, besides those that are still extant, or else he has used a recension of these Gospels with some slight changes of language and some apocryphal additions. The Gospels in the 2nd century, page 129, 1876. We conjecture that the memoirs of Justin were the materials from which our Gospels were compiled, and that they were similar to or used in conjunction with the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Credner argues that he used the Gospel of Peter. It is noticeable that the diatessaron of Justin's pupil, Tatian, was called by Epiphanius the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Theodoret tells us that the Nazarenes made use of the Gospel of Peter, and we know by the testimony of the Fathers generally that the Nazarene Gospel was that commonly called the Gospel according to the Hebrews. That Justin used this once celebrated Gospel seems all the more probable since we have the express testimony of Eusebius, E.C. History, 22, that it was used by Hegesippus, his contemporary and compatriot.